In this last video on lesson 1.1 and 1.2, we're going to be focused on sketching and labeling some figures. So for the first two examples here, I am going to have to show you how to use a protractor in person or connect you to some other videos that have some better tools available than I have. I am going to show you very quickly a sketch about these. So these are not going to be very accurate, but what I wanted to show you is just the labeling and just kind of exactly what the angle would look like. So if we wanted to draw the angle CAT, whose measure was 15 degrees, again, I would just start with a ray. The vertex is going to be A based on how it's labeled, and T will be one of the sides. And then I would use my protractor to create 15 degrees, which I feel like is like something of along this lines. And oops, this should be an A. And then I would label the other point C. Again, what I have here is I have the points clearly labeled with dots, and I have their letters next to them. Everything is in order based on what I have. I'm not floating something out in the middle of nowhere. So sometimes I see students just kind of put a C out here in the middle of nowhere without indicating where it actually is. We want to make sure that we know that point C, A, and T are on the rays, the angles in the right spots. For this one, the measure of angle D, all I have is the vertex, and it's about 134 degrees. So I'm going to say it's something like this. For this particular angle, I just have the vertex, so I usually just draw the angle first and D. When you're drawing with a protractor, draw is using tools. So you want to use your straight edge, you want to use your protractor, you want to have things very precise. Again, that's something more challenging for me to do in the videos that I'm showing you. Let's make sure we can label some figures. So in this case, I am going to mark and label the figure with the given information. Again, this is helping us use notation, make sure we understand when we look at a figure, what are we expressing? And a lot of times I say objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. And that's my way of saying that we cannot assume what's happening in a picture unless it's specifically labeled there. And so we're going to add those labels. For number 8, we want to know that the measure of angle BAD is 45 degrees. So where is angle BAD? So its vertex is at A, it goes from B to A to D. And by actually writing 45 degrees in there, I've noted that I know its actual measure. The next thing I want to label is that AD equals BD. And again, AD is a segment and BD is a segment. When I don't see the little segment notation, like when I don't see this, that's referring to the actual length of the segment. Now I don't have a specific measurement here, but what this is telling me is that segment BD is the same length as segment AD, which means those segments are congruent. Again, these indicate numbers, which is why I use an equal sign, not a congruence symbol. In this case, AD and BD are congruent, so I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put one tick mark in between A and D and one tick mark on between B and D. I could use 2 tick marks if I wanted, or 3. Then my last labeling is angle DAB. DAB is congruent to angle DBA. DBA. And so in this case, to label an angle as congruent, now I know I also have this measure in here, so it's going to be a little tricky. I use a little arc with a tick mark in it and another little arc with a tick mark. Now, I probably wouldn't label angle DBA as 45 degrees because I already have that in label in angle DAB, and I know they're congruent, so I know they're both 45, but I could if I wanted. All right, number 9. So the first thing we want to do is add point A so that A is the midpoint of segment RT. All right, so here's segment RT. Again, I'm going to kind of eyeball it in the middle, and I'm going to add my A. So I put a dot, I label it A, and again, it's a midpoint. So what does a midpoint mean? It means it divides a segment into 2 congruent segments. And so I'm going to go put 2 tick marks through segment RA and segment TA. My next thing is it's telling me that segment RQ is congruent to segment TZ. Now, because I don't know if TZ is congruent to segment AT and RT, I'm going to use a different number of tick marks. So in this case, I'll pick 1 because I've already done 2. And then here we note that angle Q is congruent to angle T. Again, I'm allowed to use just one letter here because I only have one vertex and one angle presented at both T and Q, points T and Q. That wouldn't be the case with point R or P because I have more than one angle created there. I'm going to just do a 2 tick mark just to get something different from what I labeled before. So again, I draw a little arc and I put 2 tick marks in it. All right, so for this one, you were supposed to use your protractor. Again, I don't have a protractor, but I will do my best. To draw the angle bisector of angle A in the figure, label the point where it crosses, aka intersects, segment CN as point Y. All right, so what we're going to do here is angle A, right? And what I would do is put my protractor in the middle, and whatever the angle measure happens to be, then I would divide that by 2, and then I would go ahead and find that middle amount. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that ray, pretending again that I have created 2 congruent angles, and again I'm going to label them as such, because if I'm drawing the angle bisector, I need to label that as the angle bisector. The point where it crosses segment CN, I'm going to label that as point Y. Then we're going to use our ruler to find the midpoint of segment CN. So again, you're going to take your ruler, put your ruler either at 0 at C or N. You're going to measure that, and you're going to find the midpoint. Like, let's say the total length is, I would use centimeters, by the way. Use centimeters. They're just going to give you a more accurate representation here. So let's say this was, I don't know, 5 centimeters. It's not very long. And then you divide that by 2. So we're going to mark that midpoint as point D. And again, because it's a midpoint, we're going to label it as such. Now, it could get a little confusing here because we have this Y and this D. So sometimes we can kind of go like this and kind of label that like that so that we know that we're talking about CD being DN, being congruent to DN. Are D and Y the same? And the answer here is no, they are not. But, spoiler alert, there are some times when we do bisect an angle and the point where it intersects the opposite side actually is the midpoint of the opposite side, and we are going to investigate that later. So this concludes our lessons on lessons 1.1 and 1.2. I am going to strongly suggest that you do problems from the book. Remember, the answer keys are all online on our interface. And so go ahead and do some of those problems. If you have questions, I want you again to make some notes of that so that when we meet in person or on Zoom, I can answer your questions for you. Great job finishing up these lessons.